I want to start by saying something that I think is important before I get into any of the details. I am not a hero. I want that on record. I've seen the preliminary reports that are circulating back at Central Hub, and whoever wrote those used the word remarkable 3 times in the first paragraph, and I just know that's not what happened. What happened was strange and terrifying, and at certain moments genuinely beautiful, and if I'm going to put it down on paper the way Command has asked me to, then I'm going to do it right. No embellishments, no borrowed drama. Just what actually occurred, in the order it actually occurred, with the details that matter. All right. So, let me tell you about the day an alien queen walked into my repair bay and changed everything I thought I understood about humanity's place in this galaxy. Part 1. Before she came, I had been stationed at Waymark 9 for 11 months. If you've never heard of Waymark 9, that makes complete sense. Nobody has heard of Waymark 9. It's the kind of posting that gets handed to junior specialists as a way of testing whether they'll crack without the psychological support of, say, other human beings. The official description in the posting files calls it a critical relay and maintenance outpost positioned along the secondary hyperlink corridor between the Veshrani collective territories and the outer fringe neutral zone. What that description does not mention is that the station is roughly the size of a large apartment building, that it orbits a brown dwarf that produces the ugliest light you have ever seen, this flat, dim, reddish nothing, and that for 11 months, my only company was a maintenance drone I had named Gerald and a communications AI that answered to whatever name you gave it, which I had for reasons I still can't entirely explain, named Margaret. Margaret spoke in the voice of a slightly tired school teacher. That was the default setting for that model. I'd never bothered to change it. You have an incoming vessel request, Margaret told me on the morning of October 14th. I was lying under the portside compression relay with a calibration wrench in one hand and a ration bar in the other, which gives you some sense of how sophisticated my mornings had become. I'd been at Waymark 9 long enough that I didn't even separate eating from working anymore. Everything just happened simultaneously, all the time, because there was nowhere to go and nothing to hurry toward. Is it the Veshrani supply run? I asked through a mouthful of what the wrapper called savory grain protein and what I called gray paste. Negative, Margaret said. The vessel's transponder signature does not match any registered supply vessel. The class identifier reads as Kethavari Royal Escort 3rd Wing. I stopped chewing. I actually stopped chewing for a good few seconds. I just lay there under the compression relay with the ration bar halfway to my mouth and stared at the underside of the panel above me, at all the bundled cables and the faint blue glow of the power conduits, and tried to process what Margaret had just said. The Kethavari. Okay, let me give you some context here, because if you're reading this without a background in outer fringe diplomatic intelligence, the word Kethavari might not mean much to you. The Kethavari are, and I'm going to try to describe this accurately, without the kind of breathless awe that most human documents use when they write about non-human civilizations that are more advanced than us, an ancient species. Not ancient the way we use the word when talking about Rome or Egypt. Ancient the way geologists use it when they're discussing formations that predate animal life on Earth. The Kethavari had achieved faster-than-light travel before humans had discovered that Earth was round. They had mapped 8,000 star systems before our species had figured out that fire could be controlled. They were, by any reasonable measure, so far ahead of humanity on the civilizational timeline that direct comparison felt almost like a category error. They were also, to be completely straightforward about it, not known for making social calls to backwater relay stations staffed by lone human specialists eating gray paste under compression relays. Margaret, I said carefully, is the transponder authentic? All verification layers confirm authenticity, Margaret said in her slightly tired school teacher voice. The vessel is the Cerethian Tide, 3rd-class escort cruiser registered to the Kethavari Royal House, currently registered in the name of Crown Princess Avathiel of the Kethavari Continuous Dominion. A small pause. She is requesting docking permission. I sat up so fast, I hit my head on the relay panel. The sound rang out through the whole repair bay. Gerald the drone, who was hovering in the far corner running a routine power diagnostic, swiveled his single optical sensor toward me with what I had always chosen to interpret as concern. She, I said. Crown Princess Avathiel, Margaret repeated patiently. Shall I request clarification on the purpose of the visit? I was already pulling myself out from under the relay. I was standing. I was looking down at myself, at the gray paste on my sleeve, at the calibration wrench still in my hand, at the overall state of a man who had been living alone in deep space for 11 months with a drone and a school-teacher AI. And I was doing a very rapid assessment of how completely unprepared I was for whatever was about to happen. Send her the docking protocols, I said. Standard approach, Bay 2, and Margaret, don't mention the ration bar. Noted, Margaret said, with absolutely no change in tone, which I think was her version of humor. I had exactly 22 minutes between the docking request and the moment the Cerethian tide locked onto Bay 2. I used approximately 8 of those minutes standing in front of the small mirror in the station's crew quarters, trying to make my uniform look like something other than what it was, which was a garment that had been slept in and worked in and occasionally used as a napkin for the better part of a year. I used another 6 minutes briefing myself on everything I could pull up about Kethavari Royal Protocol from the station's reference database. The database was not particularly comprehensive on the subject, partly because Waymark 9 was not the kind of posting that expected to need this information, and partly because Kethavari Royal Protocol was, according to the 3 documents I managed to find, largely ceremonial, deeply contextual, and not recommended for non-specialists to attempt without dedicated cultural training. That was tremendously helpful. The remaining 8 minutes I spent just standing in Bay 2, beside the docking clamp controls, in my slightly less terrible uniform, trying to arrange my face into an expression that communicated calm professional competence, rather than the specific variety of terrified bewilderment that I was actually experiencing. The Cerethian tide was beautiful isn't quite the right word, but it's the one that comes first. The thing about Kethavari ship design is that their engineering aesthetic is nothing like ours. Human ships look like things we built, if that makes sense. You can see the welds and the function and the utilitarian decisions behind every panel. Kethavari ships look like they grew. The Cerethian tide came into Bay 2 the way a large living creature might move through water, unhurried, and faintly luminous, the outer hull shifting between blue and deep violet depending on the angle, covered in these flowing organic lines that I later learned were actually structural reinforcements, but which, when you see them for the first time, look more like decoration, or art, or something that exists in the space between those 2 words. The docking clamps engaged, the bay pressurized, and then the ship's entry ramp descended. She was alone. That was the first thing I noticed, and it was the thing I kept coming back to throughout everything that followed. A crown princess of the Kethavari continuous dominion, traveling in what our records designated a royal escort, and she came down that ramp completely alone. No attendants, no security detail, no visible escort of any kind. She was tall. Kethavari are uniformly tall by human standards, between 7 and 8 feet, with that distinctive build that's not quite what you'd call slender, but which has nothing to do with human weight distribution either. More like elegant. Functional in a way that looks effortless. Her face was the thing I was trying hardest not to stare at, partly because I'd been alone for 11 months and another conscious mind was a shock to the system regardless of species, and partly because Kethavari faces are genuinely difficult to look at without your attention getting hooked on the wrong things. The symmetry is too perfect. The eyes are too large, too dark, too luminous. Everything about the overall presentation says pay attention to this, in a way that bypasses whatever part of your brain is supposed to regulate polite social behavior. She had the formal markings of her house on her forearms, dark blue, almost black, the kind of traditional tattoo equivalent that Kethavari royalty carries as an identifier. Her clothing was not quite armor, not quite formal wear, something that split the difference. Functional but deliberate, the kind of outfit you wear when you're not sure whether you're going somewhere safe. She came down the ramp and she stopped, and she looked at me. I did the thing I had rehearsed in the mirror. I put my right fist against my chest and bowed my head, not a deep bow, because the reference documents had all agreed that deep bows from a non-subject were read as submissive rather than respectful, and you were supposed to aim for respectful, and I said, Crown Princess Avathiel, Specialist Davin Orel, Station Waymark 9, welcome to the relay post. I apologize, we don't get many visitors, and I'm afraid the hospitality I can offer is fairly limited. You are the only human here, she said. Her voice was, I want to describe it accurately. It had a quality that translated voices don't quite capture, even good ones. There was a layering to it, like she was speaking in more than one register simultaneously, the main words on top and something harmonic underneath that you heard more in your chest than with your ears. Her translator unit was good, state-of-the-art, clearly, because the words came out in clear standard with only the faintest half-second delay. Yes, I said, just me. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said something I was not expecting at all. She said, my father told me that humans always apologize when they have nothing to apologize for. I stood there for a moment. I genuinely did not know what to do with that. I mean, it was true, wasn't it? I had just apologized for the station's hospitality before she'd complained about anything. I hadn't even done anything wrong. I just opened with an apology as a kind of social preamble, the way humans do, constantly, automatically, almost like a reflex. Your father, I said, has he spent time with humans? Something moved in her expression. I couldn't identify it exactly. Kethavari facial musculature is different enough from ours that the emotional map doesn't translate one-to-one. But whatever it was weighted. There was something in it that I would have called grief in a human face, though I wasn't certain enough to say that out loud. Yes, she said simply, he has spent a great deal of time with humans. She paused. He is the reason I am here. She came fully down the ramp then, and the entry closed behind her with a sound like a whispered exhalation. And she stood in my bay too, looking around at the relay station's functional and deeply unglamorous interior with an expression I couldn't read at all. May we speak? She asked. Of course, I said. Yes. Come with me. The only place in Waymark 9 that could plausibly be called comfortable was the main operations room, which was also the communications hub, the navigation monitoring center, and my de facto living space. Because the crew quarters were technically separate, but the operations room had the better chair, and I'd long since stopped maintaining the fiction of keeping work and rest in different physical locations. I cleared a stack of calibration logs off the second seat, the only second seat, and I moved a half-eaten pack of actual dried fruit that I'd been rationing for 3 months, because it was the only thing on the station that tasted like it had come from an actual plant. And I said, please sit. And Crown Princess Avathiel of the Kethavari Continuous Dominion sat in my mismatched relay station chair and folded her hands in her lap and looked at me with those enormous dark eyes. And I had a very strong feeling that I was about to have a conversation that was going to require a clarity I wasn't sure I possessed. Specialist Orel, she said. Davin, I said automatically, and then caught myself, because I had absolutely no idea whether Kethavari royalty used first names with strangers. Sorry, that is, please, if you prefer specialist. My father told me that too, she said, and there was the faintest thing in her voice that might have been amusement. That humans offer their given names immediately, that they prefer closeness to formality even when they don't know the other party. I sat down across from her. Your father, I said carefully, knew a lot about humans. Yes, she said, and then, he is dying, Specialist Orel. Davin, he has been dying for some time, and when Kethavari of advanced age begin the long decline, they often become reflective. They begin to speak of things they have not spoken of for many cycles. She paused. He has spent the last 2 years speaking almost exclusively about humans. I didn't say anything. I waited. He served in the Fringe Mediation Corps, she continued, 40 years ago. You understand 40 of your years, which are somewhat different from ours, but approximately that span. He was a junior mediator, assigned to the dispute resolution channels that operated along the boundary between Kethavari territories and what was then the very outer edge of human expansion. The early years, when your species was first moving beyond your home system into the wider lanes. She looked at me steadily. He met many humans in that period. He worked alongside them. He came to know them in ways that his superiors found unusual. Excessive, some said. Kethavari of his generation were taught a particular framework for understanding younger species, and that framework did not include the kind of close relationship that my father eventually formed with the humans of the Fringe Mediation Corps. What kind of relationship did he form? I asked. Friendship, she said, and the word came out simple and clear, and somehow it landed heavier than anything else she might have said. I waited again. She seemed to be organizing something inside herself, the way people do when they're talking about something that costs them something. He spoke of humans the way other Kethavari speak of home, she said finally. With that specific quality of longing that belongs to a place you love and cannot return to, he said. She paused. She looked down at her hands for a moment. He said that he had never, in all his years of service and all the species he encountered in the fringe lanes, met a people so consistently willing to be wrong. He meant it as a profound compliment. He explained it to me many times. A small sound, almost a breath. He said that every other species he worked with in mediation was careful, defended, unwilling to acknowledge error, because error implied weakness, and weakness in the fringe lanes carried real consequence. But the humans would say, I was wrong in the middle of a negotiation without flinching. They would change their position based on new information and not experience it as a humiliation. He said it was the strangest and most remarkable thing he had ever witnessed. He said it again and again for 40 years. The operations room was very quiet. Gerald the drone had followed us in. He does that, just sort of gravitates toward activity. I'd never reprogrammed it out of him. And he hovered near the far wall, his optical sensor making its slow, periodic sweep, the way he always did, steady and unaware. He sounds, I said carefully, like someone I'd have liked to meet. Yes, she said, everyone who knew him says that. Another pause, longer this time. He wants to see a human before he dies. He has asked for this. He was told it was not possible, that the politics of the current period make direct Kethavari human diplomatic contact at the royal level inadvisable, that the timing is wrong, that the corridors are unsettled. She looked up at me. He is 93 years old by your reckoning, and he is asking to see a human before he dies, and he is being told about politics. I understood something then, or I started to. You're not here for station business, I said. No, she said. You found the nearest human posting. You are the nearest human installation to Kethavari sovereign space that does not require diplomatic clearance for approach, she said. A relay station, amber-level posting, one specialist, no formal contact restrictions under current treaty terms. She held my gaze. I looked for a long time. I sat with that for a moment. You came here, I said slowly, because I'm the closest human you could reach without starting an international incident. Yes, she said. And you want what? You want me to come back with you, to see your father? I want you to know, she said, and her voice changed slightly, took on something more careful, more deliberate, that I am not asking you to step into a political situation. I am not asking you as a representative of humanity. I am not asking you as a specialist of any kind. I am asking you as a person, as a human person, because my father is dying and he loves your species in a way that I have never entirely understood, and I would like. She stopped. She seemed to be doing something with the emotion in her voice, managing it the way you manage something that wants to spill. I would like him to be able to say goodbye. I want to pause here and tell you what was going through my head in that moment, because I think it matters. The obvious thing, the easy thing, would have been to say yes immediately. That's the heroic narrative. The lone human in the relay station, the dying alien diplomat who loved humanity, the royal daughter making a quiet, desperate journey across dangerous space. The obvious shape of the story points straight toward, yes, of course, let's go. But I am not telling you the obvious shape of the story. I'm telling you what actually happened. What actually happened is that I sat there for probably 30 full seconds, looking at Crown Princess Avathiel of the Kethavari Continuous Dominion, and I thought about 11 months of solitude and calibration wrenches and gray paste. And I thought about command and the protocol documents that all said, consult Central Hub before engaging in any unsanctioned contact with Kethavari nationals. And I thought about the fact that I was one person with no clearance and no diplomatic training and no idea what I was walking into. And some part of me wanted very much to say, I would have to clear this with Central Hub, and the communication delay is about 14 hours each way. So if you could give me roughly 30 hours. And then I thought about a 93-year-old alien man who had spent the last 2 years of his life talking about humans, who had carried 40 years of friendship and wonder across his entire long life, who had watched the humans of the fringe lanes say, I was wrong without flinching, and had loved them for it. How long would the journey take? I said. Something in her face shifted, just slightly, like a door that had been held very carefully in a half-closed position, and now it opened fractionally. 14 hours, she said, in my ship if you are willing. And your father's health? Stable for now, she said, but the decline is not reversible and the pace of it is uncertain. I looked around the operations room. At the relay panels and the calibration logs and Gerald's hovering optical sensor and Margaret's blank interface screen. At all 11 months of my small, contained, functional life in this station. I'm going to leave a message for Central Hub, I said. Full disclosure, full details. They're not going to be happy about it. I understand, she said. And I want to be clear, I said, that I'm coming as myself, not as a diplomat, not as anything official, just as a person. That, she said, is exactly what my father asked for. I recorded the message for Central Hub at 9:30 hours. It was 4 minutes and 17 seconds long, and I tried to explain things clearly without using the words alien royalty in the first sentence, which I mostly succeeded at. I told them where I was going and why and what vessel I was traveling on. I told them I had reason to believe this was important and that I was making the judgment call on my own, and that I understood the protocol implications and would accept whatever review they deemed necessary when I returned. Then I put the message in the queue for the next transmission window, changed into my cleanest uniform, put the calibration wrench carefully back in its bracket, told Gerald to keep running his diagnostics, and followed Crown Princess Avathiel back down to Bay 2. Margaret said nothing as I left. Then, just as the bay doors were closing behind me, she said, in her slightly tired school teacher voice, "Safe travels, Davin." It was the first time in 11 months she'd used my first name. I stopped walking for a second. Then I went through the doors. Part 2, the ship, the journey, the things she told me. The interior of the Cerethian Tide was. I've been trying to figure out how to describe it since I got back, and I keep running up against the limits of language. You know how certain spaces feel inhabited in a way that goes beyond just having furniture and equipment? The way an old library feels different from a new one, not because of the information it contains, but because of all the time that has soaked into the walls, all the attention and thought and searching that has happened in that space. The Cerethian Tide felt like that. Not old, exactly, but deep, like there were layers to it. The walls were the same material as the exterior hull, that shifting blue-violet, though inside it was more muted, more toward blue, and the lighting came from somewhere diffuse rather than from any specific source, which should have felt strange but actually felt comfortable, the way overcast natural light feels comfortable. Nothing was angular in the way human ship interiors are angular. Everything curved, not extravagantly, not showily, just naturally. Like things that had grown into their shapes, rather than been imposed into them. There was a main cabin, seating that was clearly designed for Kethavari bodies, but which, when I settled into it, turned out to accommodate a human frame reasonably well. A low table. And across the entire portside wall, a window, real transparent material, not a display screen, actual direct view of space, that stretched from near the floor to the ceiling and showed the brown dwarf's dim red light painting the stars in colors that I'd seen every day for 11 months and had somehow never quite looked at properly before. Avathiel, she had asked me to use her name, not her title, at some point in the first hour of the journey, and I'd tried to do it naturally, the way you do when you're not sure if you're being too familiar, brought something to drink. Not water. Something warm and faintly amber-colored that smelled like, I can only describe it as every pleasant smell that exists, all at once, very quietly. Like if someone had composed a scent the way you compose music, with different elements playing different roles. She sat across from me, and I held the cup and looked at the stars through the portside window, and I said, "What was his name?" "Your father." "Vetharis," she said. "Vetharis of House Cerethi, 3rd tier of the Mediation Corps eventually. He reached the 3rd tier in his 42nd year." She said it the way people say things they're proud of, with a kind of quiet care. "The 3rd tier is we don't have a human equivalent exactly. It's the rank at which a mediator is considered capable of handling first contact scenarios alone, independently, without oversight." "That's significant," I said. "Very," she said. "Very few reach it." He was, at the time, the youngest to achieve it in the outer fringe division. A small pause. He was also the most formally reprimanded mediator in the history of that division. I looked at her. For what? A brief thing crossed her face, warm and tired simultaneously. For caring too much, she said. That is not the official language of the reprimands. Officially, they cited excessive personal engagement with non-Kethavari parties and inappropriate investment in the outcomes of mediation proceedings. But what they meant was that he cared too much. He took the humans home. She seemed to search for a better way to say it. Not literally, he took them inside himself. He let them matter to him in a way that Kethavari mediators are trained not to do. You are supposed to remain at a certain distance from the parties you work with. It is considered a professional discipline, objectivity. And he couldn't do that, I said. He refused, she said, and the distinction mattered in her voice. He could have. He was a disciplined man in every other respect. He simply decided very early that the distance was wasteful, that something was lost in the distance, something real. She looked at her own cup. He said it to me once, he said. Avathiel, I watched humans sit across from each other with everything at stake and make each other laugh, even in the middle of it. I could not stay behind the glass after that. I didn't want to. I sat with that for a while. The amber drink was gentle, warming without heat, and outside the window the stars moved slowly as the ship turned onto its heading. Can I ask you something? I said. Yes. Why does it matter? To him, I mean the goodbye. If he knew the humans 40 years ago, most of them would be, generations of humans pass in 40 years. The people he knew wouldn't. He knows that, she said. He is not sentimental in that way. He does not expect to see the people he knew. He understands that human generations are short. Something shifted in her expression, became more difficult. What he wants, what he has said clearly many times, is to look at a human face and say thank you. That is all. He wants to express gratitude to the species, not to any individual. To the idea of humanity, to whatever it is in humans that made him able to care again after 30 years of learning not to. She paused. He says the humans gave something back to him that his training had taken away. What was that? She was quiet for a moment. The ship moved through space, smooth and almost silent. Wonder, she said. We flew for 14 hours. In that time, Avathiel told me more about her father than I think she had told anyone in a long time. She told me about the mediation he'd run in the fringe lanes in the early period of human expansion, the boundary disputes, the resource negotiations, the territorial gray zones that were always potential flashpoints between established species, and a new one still figuring out how far it could reach. She told me that he had found the humans fundamentally unpredictable in a way that other species were not. Not chaotic, she was specific about that. Not reckless. Just variable, capable of things you didn't anticipate. He said that with every other species he could build a model, she told me. A map of how they would respond, what they valued, what they feared, how they would behave under pressure. After enough time you could predict within reasonable parameters. He said he could never fully model humans. Not because they were irrational, they were often quite rational, sometimes more pragmatically rational than species who had been in the lanes for thousands of years, but because they kept changing, adapting, responding to new information in ways that updated their behavior in ways he hadn't predicted. We're stubborn too, I said. Humans can be incredibly stubborn. He said that as well, she agreed. He said they could be stubborn as asteroids when they thought they were right, but he said the interesting thing was that they seemed to know the difference internally, not as a public display. They would hold on to something hard, and then in private, without announcement, they would let it go and adapt. He found it remarkable, like a tree that bends in wind rather than breaks. That's a generous reading, I said. He was a generous man, she said simply. There was a long, quiet stretch. The kind that comes naturally in long journeys when you've been talking for hours, and you're both comfortable enough to let silence happen without filling it. I watched the stars. Can I ask you something now? Avathiel said. Yes. Why did you agree to come? You didn't have to. You had protocols to follow. The safe thing would have been to contact your command and wait. I thought about it honestly. I don't entirely know, I said. Part of it was, you're out here for a long time alone, and you get this way where normal things stop feeling quite real. And when something like this happens, something that is genuinely unlike anything in the ordinary run of days, it's easier to say yes. Because the ordinary run of days has stopped being a very compelling argument. She nodded slowly. Part of it, I continued, was just I believed you. I believed it was real. I don't know how to explain that. I just looked at you and I knew you weren't playing some game. You were just someone trying to do a hard thing for someone you loved, and I didn't want to be the bureaucratic wall that stopped that. She looked at me with those dark, luminous eyes. My father said that too, she said. About humans. He said they had an instinct for recognizing when something mattered, even when it was inconvenient, even when they didn't benefit personally. He said they would inconvenience themselves consistently for things that mattered. He was idealistic, I said. He was observational, she said. He kept notes. He has volumes of notes, every human interaction he ever had recorded and preserved. She paused. He has been reading them to me at night when he is awake and I sit with him for the last 6 months, every night, 40 years of notes about humans. I didn't say anything for a while. Then I said, Avathiel, yes. When we get there, I don't know what to say to him. I'm not a diplomat. I'm not a representative of anything. I'm just a person. I know, she said. That's what he asked for. But I don't want to disappoint him. I want what I say to him to matter. She looked at me for a long moment. Davin, she said, and it was the first time she'd used my name without the title or the preceding specialist, just the name itself, plain and direct. You already did the thing that mattered. You got in the ship. Part 3, Arrival, and the room where he was waiting. The Kethavari home world, Serethi Prime, was the kind of place that makes you understand why species become territorial. I've seen images. Every human who has clearance to access outer fringe spatial records has seen the images. But images are nothing. You might as well show someone a postcard of the ocean and expect them to understand the ocean. We came in through the upper atmosphere on the Serethian Tide's descent arc, and I was looking out that port side window the whole time, and the planet resolved out of cloud cover the way a painting resolves when you step close enough to see the brushwork. It was okay. The sky was deep teal, not our blue, not quite. Something further toward green without quite being green, the way the edge of a peridot gem looks when you tip it toward the light. The surface of the planet from altitude was a mosaic of deep blue-green ocean and land masses that were covered in something that from altitude looked like purple-gray forest, vast and unbroken except for the cities, which, they didn't look built, the cities. They looked like they had organized themselves, like crystal formations. Long curving spires and complex interconnected low structures. All of it that shifting blue-violet that the ships used, all of it luminous in the teal sky light. We landed in what Avathiel described as the private landing court of the royal house, which, for a human analogy, would be something like pulling up to a parking spot beside the most important and beautiful building you've ever seen. There were attendants waiting, 3 of them all formally dressed, all very tall, all visibly surprised, and that translation held across the species divide. Surprise is apparently a universal expression, or at least similar enough in Kethavari faces for me to read it clearly, to see a human climbing out of the crown princess's personal vessel. Avathiel spoke to them in Kethavari, rapid and low, and whatever she said resolved the visible surprise into something more like neutral professional attention. She gestured for me to follow her, and we went inside. The interior of the royal house of Serethi was, look, I'm not going to spend a lot of time describing it, partly because it would take too long and partly because the important thing wasn't the architecture, however extraordinary it was. The important thing was the room at the far end of a corridor on the 3rd level, the room with the wide windows overlooking a garden that was entirely the wrong colors. Not wrong for the planet, wrong for Earth. Everything slightly off the human palate in a way that felt like seeing through someone else's eyes, and the figure reclining in the large chair by those windows. Vetharis of House Serethi was 93 years old by human reckoning. He was, I don't know how to explain how you perceive extreme age in a species that doesn't age the way humans do. The surface markers are different, but something about the quality of his stillness told you. And something about the way he held himself, not weakened, not broken, but with the careful economy of motion that comes when you have learned exactly how much energy you have and how to place it. His eyes were the same kind as Avathiel's, very large, very dark, very luminous, but with something additional in them. Not wisdom exactly, because wisdom is a word we use casually for things that earn it. Something more like depth, the depth that comes from having paid attention for a very long time. He was looking at the window when we came in. Then he looked at us. Then he looked at me. And his face did something that I have been trying to describe for 2 weeks since I got back. And I keep getting it wrong, and I'm going to try one more time. He looked at me the way someone looks when they've been waiting for something for a very long time, and they weren't certain it would come, and it came. Not surprise, exactly. More like the absence of the tension that surprise implies. Like something settling into place. Like a door completing a long, slow, gentle close. Avathiel, he said. His voice was the layered, harmonic quality of Kethavari's speech, softened by age and some quality I couldn't immediately identify. You found one. I did, she said. Something in her voice was very careful and very tender simultaneously. He looked at me, I looked at him. Then he said something in Kethavari, and his translator unit, a different model from Avathiel's, older, slower by a fraction, rendered it into standard. You got on the ship, he said. Something moved through my chest. I did, I said. A slow sound from him, not quite a laugh. The Kethavari version of something in the neighborhood of a laugh, warm and soft. She told you about me, he said. She did, I said, for 14 hours. Everything. I don't think you can do everything in 14 hours. Another sound, warmer this time. Sit down, he said. Please, a small pause, please. I sat down. And Vetharis of House Serethi, who had spent 40 years of his life in the fringe lanes working alongside the earliest human explorers, who had been reprimanded by his superiors for caring too much, who had filled volumes with notes about a species that had given him back his wonder. He looked at me with those deep, luminous eyes, and he said, Tell me something true about your life, not important, not diplomatic, something real. I looked at him. I named my maintenance drone Gerald, I said. After my grandfather was a stubborn, impossible man who never gave up on anything. The drone doesn't give up either. It just keeps doing its diagnostics regardless of anything else that's happening. So, Gerald. Vetharis looked at me for a long time. That, he said very quietly, is exactly what I mean. We talked for 3 hours. I am not going to record what he said to me, most of it. Some things belong in the room where they were said. Some things are meant for the two people present in a particular moment and lose something essential when you carry them out into documents and official reports. What I will say is this. He was everything his daughter had described and also something beyond the description, because descriptions of people are always smaller than the people themselves. He was curious and warm and precise and funny in a way that landed sideways, the humor of someone who had spent a lifetime learning to see things at an angle. He asked me about Earth, which I had not visited in 4 years. He asked me about the posting, and he listened to the 11 months of solitude without pity but with genuine interest, the way you listen to something that confirms a thing you already believed. He asked me what I missed. My sister, I said, and real coffee and rain. Rain, he said, and the word turned over in his mouth like something worth examining. I have read about human rain, the way you stand in it sometimes, deliberately, without shelter. Yeah, I said, it sounds strange when you put it like that. No, he said, it sounds right, exactly right. Near the end, he said something I want to put down carefully because I think it matters. He said, I'm going to tell you why I asked Avathiel to find a human. Not for sentiment, though there is sentiment, I will not pretend otherwise, but for something specific. He looked at me steadily. I have watched your species from the edge of the lanes for 40 years. I have watched you make mistakes of every possible variety. Large mistakes, small mistakes, the kind of mistakes that are genuinely catastrophic and the kind that are merely embarrassing. I have watched you be arrogant and afraid and sometimes cruel, the way all young species are in the period before they fully understand what they are. A pause. And I have watched what comes after every time without exception. Something comes after in humans, something gets up, something tries again in a different way. Something looks at the wreckage and starts to figure out what it got wrong. He was quiet for a moment. That is not common. In a galaxy of old, defended, careful species who have learned to fear failure, that is not common. And it is very precious, Davin, more precious than your species currently understands. I didn't say anything. I wanted to see a human face before I die, he said, because I wanted to remind myself that it exists, that it is still out there, that the thing I loved is still real. He looked at me with that deep, settled gaze. And I wanted to say thank you, to whatever you are carrying forward from whatever your people were. Thank you for still being that, for getting in the ship. I sat there with that for a long time. Then I said, because it was true and it was all I had, "Thank you for caring about us when you didn't have to." And he made that warm sound again, the not quite laugh. "I always had to," he said. "That was never the question." Closing of Part 1. I flew back to Waymark 9 the next morning. Avathiel brought me herself. We were quieter on the return journey, not uncomfortably, just the quiet of two people who had moved through something together and were sitting on the far side of it. As we approached Waymark 9, she said, "He slept well last night. He hasn't slept well in months." "I'm glad," I said. "He kept your name," she said. "He said it several times before he slept. Davin, he liked the sound of it." A pause. "He likes human names. He says they are honest." Short and honest. I looked at Waymark 9 coming into view against the brown dwarf's dim red light, and it looked exactly like it always had, small and functional and unglamorous, and I thought, I will never see this place the same way. The docking clamps engaged. Bay 2 received the Cerethian tide one more time, and before I walked back down my own ramp into my own station, I stopped. "Avathiel," I said. "Yes." "If you need to send word about him, about how he's doing." I paused. "You can find me here for the next few months at least. My comm address is the station's public relay. It's in the fringe directories. You don't need clearance." She looked at me with those large dark eyes. "My father said one more thing about humans," she said, "last night before he slept. He said they always offer the door back, even when they don't know why. They always leave the door open." I stood there. "He was right," I said. "I know," she said. I walked back into my station. The doors of Bay 2 sealed behind me, and I stood in the silence of Waymark 9, with Gerald hovering somewhere behind me and Margaret's interface screen blank, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 11 months. Not loneliness, something almost like its opposite. Like I was the most recently connected point in a very long, very old, very tenacious web. Margaret's voice came right on schedule. "Welcome back, Davin. You have 47 messages from Central Hub." "I bet I do," I said. And I sat down, and I started writing this account, and I have been trying to find the right ending line for 2 weeks, and I think I finally have it. Betharis of House Cerethi spent 40 years loving a species that didn't know he existed. That's not an unusual thing in the end. The best love usually goes that way, offered freely, across distances the other party can't see, sustained by something that has nothing to do with reciprocity and everything to do with the simple, stubborn, human-adjacent fact that some things are worth carrying forward, even when no one is watching, even when the space is very quiet, even when the light is wrong, even when you're alone with a drone named Gerald and 14 months still left on your posting. The door stays open. That's the thing, the door always stays open.